Okay, here I am. So let me look at the chat. Okay, nothing new over the chat. So, about reading, again, let me just see. Okay, perfect. Figures matter, and we already discussed figures, and it is a tip again for writing, but it is also a suggestion once again for getting the most of the information with efficiency while reading. About the figures, in few words, what I would like to say is ideally they should be understandable, at least the kind of information provided, even without reading the caption. So use titles in the axis, use legend. Sometimes some authors, including myself in some papers, I include the legend into the caption. This is not in favor of clarity. So if I don't see in the figure the indication of what symbols mean, and I need to look at the caption for that, it's not very efficient. So try to make an effort with the figures to make them understandable. And another thing that I want to emphasize, nowadays there are several tools available for making very catchy figures, including artificial intelligence. Most of the journals allow you to include figures created with artificial intelligence, provided you recognize it. So you acknowledge the artificial intelligence for helping you creating the figures. There are also several softwares, I mean, both scientific like MATLAB, Python, and others that are graphical tools like Photoshop, like GIMP. It is becoming an increasingly important requirement that the figures are very good quality, because for the very reason that there are several software that are easy to use nowadays. So if you look at recent papers and you make a comparison with a paper that was written 30 years ago, you see that there has been indeed a remarkable improvement in the quality of the figures. Therefore, make an effort to get up to date. And if you recognize a weakness on your side, again, I'm talking about writing now. If you recognize a weakness in creating very nice figures, try to fill the gap. And it's not difficult. There is, and this is quite frequent. You shouldn't feel guilty for that. We have in general a resistance to change. In general, it's a human attitude, recognized resistance to change, which implies, in the specific case I am discussing now, figures, a resistance to learn new tools. Nowadays, it's essential that you remove this kind of resistance. Keep in mind that usually this feeling of uncomfort when you learn a new tool is very short-lasting. So if you survive the first half an hour, you have also a chance of getting passionate about what you are learning. And to give you an example, I thought about 5 years ago, when I learned a kind of software that is very much used in my field, that I had concluded my experience of learning how to code new coding languages. 1 year ago, I realized that I needed to learn one more, Python, because I realized that Python was the superstar, the very up-to-date solution. And then I made an effort to fill the gap. And again, it was not easy the first day, but then I got passionate about it. So try to be really up to date when you write scientific papers, because this makes your contribution very relevant. Okay, so now we are progressing in the domain of writing. Students as future authors, and also your master thesis, it's an interesting exercise of writing, and the master thesis can be translated into a scientific paper, into a paper later on. And this is quite usual. I mean, it is not, it is, I mean, usual probably is not the correct word. It's not frequent, but it is increasingly the case that students write a paper after their thesis. And so let's try to get now with more details into the challenge, the task of writing. So first of all, I mean, writing the paper gives to you the real means to get into what you did. Because you make an experiment, you make a research, you reach conclusions, but really you gain a full picture of what you did when you write. And I tell you more, I think the real full picture is obtained when revising the paper. You submit a paper, you write a paper, you submit it, you get the reviews, and this is, I think, the most difficult step. You get the reviews, which means an independent assessment of your paper, hopefully unbiased, hopefully. Okay, I see your question in the chat, and I tell you, hopefully unbiased, and you need to revise the paper. And here you really get the full understanding of it. One thing, this step of revision quite often may lead to worsening the quality of the paper, because you know, if you get like 3 reviews, but maybe in some of the cases you get 5 of them, and you revise the paper by addressing the comment of the reviewers in sequence, sometimes the paper gets more confused. So this step of revision, the reason why it becomes the real crucial step and the real door for getting the full picture of what you are researching on, the reason is the reason is that you have to be really very careful when you revise the paper. And remember, not all the comments of the reviewers are right, but we will discuss this in the future. Now let's start more from the beginning of writing. And let me see the question on the chat. Within the structure, which section is considered the most important? Discussion of results. First, I don't think there is a unique answer to your question, because it depends on how the paper is structured. For instance, is there a discussion session or not? We already said last time that the discussion section it's may be present, but it's not necessary. It can be included into the conclusions. So there is no unique answer, and in some of the papers, the conclusion is really just a quick summary. In this case, the most important section is probably the discussion of the results, because it is where you make a critical assessment of what you reached. But actually, really, in some papers, in some cases, the most important section may be the abstract. Think of a review paper. Or in some cases where an innovative methodology is presented, it's the methods section that may be more important. In any case, I tell you what high-profile journals like Nature or Science, they require. They want the abstract, the introduction, and then the results, and then discussion and conclusion. The methodology is something that is considered as supplementary information. So this means that for them, it's the results, the important section. And because, of course, if the only one section, okay, there is also the conclusion, but let's say results and discussion is the most important. But actually, it's also up to you. Another thing that I would like to tell you, but you already understood this concept, it's now we are suggesting how to write some guidance. But remember that flexibility and diversity remain the keys. So it's important to have a guidance because you get oriented, but once you get oriented, then feel free of deciding that the most important section of your paper is the introduction, because you provide a very good motivation, for instance, for your work. So basically, I'm not answering your question in a firm manner, but I hope that I delivered the concept. Very good. So these are the skills that you gain by writing a paper. And remember, a paper starts from a research question. And be prepared to answer this key question from a reader or from a reviewer or from a colleague. What is your research question? And it's not easy, because sometimes we make a full research without being fully aware of the research question. So be prepared in general in your career to answer key questions which may convince the person you talk to that you have a full control of what you are doing. Like, what is your research question in this paper? What did you do? Very basic question. Sometimes when people ask me, so what did you do in your career, or what do you consider is your most important contribution? It's extremely important to be prepared to reply. Or another example, what is the real innovative contribution of this paper? So what is your research question? And what is why this paper is really innovative? Why I should read it? And keep these questions in mind when you start writing. So identify your research question, and or identify the purpose in any case of your paper. Like if it is a review paper, the purpose is providing a solid review. Now, so let's start from it, okay? So here there is an example, but there are many, of course, research questions possible. Does listening to music improve concentration while studying? And this could be also the title of the paper. And the title of the paper may be the research question, but it's important that you have it clear. And now, from, sorry, here there is a spelling error. I will need to correct the slide. From research question to scientific paper. And so basically, after you identify your problem, and be sure that you have a good motivation, you have a good research question, usually the workflow is literature review, getting information. And now artificial intelligence helps a lot in getting information, but beware, of course, of the mistakes of artificial intelligence, of the weaknesses of artificial intelligence. And then you may have an experiment after the literature review. Sometimes don't think of a lab. The experiment may be an experiment on the computer, or a very simple survey of people's opinion. This is an experiment. Then you may have data, and then you have methods, you have an analysis, and then you get your results. And this is the workflow, and then we come to the point of writing. And when you start writing, usually people suggest to start with an outline. It is a good strategy. So basically, you start by abstract, and you put there 3 things you want to include, you want to say. And then introduction, and you put subtitles like subsections, etc. When you do this, so you have finished your work and you start writing and you get an idea of the content of your paper, it's the time to choose the journal. So choosing the right journal is essential. And you know that there are journals with different features. Let me see if the next slide is about the journal. No, it's a pool. Let's wait for the pool. So choosing the journal. So you refer to a discipline, to a specific field. You should gain a knowledge of the possible alternatives, and usually your advisor is the main source of information. If it's not your advisor or you want additional information, the question that we raised over the chat is very relevant to that. You go to Web of Science or Scopus and you look for categories, and then you get a list of the journals. An important information is the quartile of the journal. So they rank the journal based on some bibliometrics in a ranking list, starting from the best to the less visible. Usually it is measured in terms of visibility. If you publish on a journal with high visibility, you are likely to get a lot of citations. Otherwise, you get less citations. Given that we want to get citations, of course, we target the highest level. First quartile means that when they have the full rank, the journal, the first 25% of the journal is the first quartile, and it's usually considered a good, a good ranking, the first quartile, the highest. Usually people don't split further. They say first quartile, and then that's it, okay? And then, of course, there is the second quartile, the third quartile. Usually, but not necessarily, the highest the position of a journal in the ranking and the highest the selectivity of the journal. The most selective journals are Nature, Science, and they are at the top. And the reason why they are so selective is that they receive a lot of submissions, and therefore they need to make a selection that is very severe. So just be aware that there is a trade-off. So when I write papers, I decide the journal basing also on the value I think the paper has. It's perfectly normal that there are some papers that are very innovative, other papers that are less innovative. Still, they deserve publication, but they are less innovative. So I try to select the most appropriate journal in this by taking this information into account. If we are too ambitious, we lose time, and time is important. Timing is important, especially for students. So sometimes I prefer to go with a safe option. In doing this identification of the journal, we need also to consider that, first of all, I assume that we are talking about peer-reviewed journals, not about gray literature. Gray literature is something not peer-reviewed. My suggestion for you, avoid it. Avoid it depending on your target, but if the target is also building your career and your reputation, let's stick on peer-reviewed journals. When we identify the peer-reviewed journal that is most appropriate, you should take into account that there is a kind of reservation against what are called predatory journals. And these journals, basically, they try to attract authors and with different strategies. these journals that are identified as predatory. I make a premise. I don't like this definition because the journal is not doing anything illegal or unethical, but they are classified as predatory, which means that, this definition have some implications of unethical behavior. So I don't like this definition. But indeed, there are some journals that they tend to attract authors. And there are several ways to do that. One first possibility is to offer very reduced publication fees. Another possibility, which is, I think, less fair, is to reduce the level of selection. So they tend to publishing anything is submitted. And there are several journals classified as predators basing on this criteria. So the result is that the journals become very visible because they publish a lot, and therefore they also get a lot of citations. But on the other hand, what is the implication? The implication is that within these published contributions, there are some of them that are very poor. And therefore, this is something we don't want, actually. Without, even if the behavior is not unethical, is not unfair, is not illegal, absolutely, but we don't want our papers published side to side with very poor contributions. And this is a first thing that we should just take into account. A journal is classified as predatory. I don't like this classification. I reject it. On the other hand, let's look at the content. Is it true, or what is the quality? There are some journals that everyone knows that they have good quality, Science, Nature, everyone knows it. There are other journals that people may not know, and it's not so clear. So be careful, because to avoid journals that try to publish very poor contributions. You don't want that. And so you may look at the list of the predatory journals, but in any case, try to get information. This journal is selective or not, the contributions are good or not. This is important. Of course, it may happen that you get rejected, but it's much better to get rejected than to get accepted a good contribution that at the end of the story is not taking the visibility it deserves because it is published side to side with poor papers. So usually these journals are in the lowest quartiles, second, third, but there are examples of journals in the first quartile. They don't excel for the quality of the contributions. Why this is also important? Because if a journal is known, independently of the classification predatory, not predatory, but is known for the poor quality of the contributions, when people have to evaluate your productivity, they may give you a lower score. So just be careful. When you identify the journal, you may use the level of selection as a criteria, but don't exaggerate in choosing the easiest one because it's still in the first quartile. It may look for the reason why it is easy. Try to look at the content. Another important thing, there are some journals which look for visibility. And what is the way journals, even prestigious one, and what is the way journals look for visibility? Usually through citations, because through the metrics. This is not a good thing. I mean, on the other hand, I understand the need to survive for the publishing houses, but still, it's not a very good thing. So basically, what they do is to try to prefer papers that increase their visibility. So what are the reasons which may induce a publisher to believe that a paper increases its visibility? First, number of authors. I realized, even if it's not written anywhere, that the larger the number of authors and the more likely is the acceptance. Because, I mean, more people know about the journal. So suppose that you make a paper with 400 authors. It may happen that in some scientific disciplines, this is not considered a good thing. In other disciplines, it's the norm. But for a publisher, it's good because 400 people know about the journal and may cite the journal. Second criteria that may be used is the contribution popular within the community that usually publishes over that journal. This means, is the paper likely to get citations or it's not because it's not popular, the topic within the community? Is the paper including references to papers published in the same journal? Unfortunately, this is a criteria that may be used by publishers. So, moral of the story. Without lowering your attention to ethics, I highly recommend you pay attention to ethics, to pay attention to be very ethically correct in the development of your career, because it pays back a lot, not a little. Better to publish less, but with a perfect ethical behavior, perfectly correct ethical behavior, than to lower your attention to ethical recommendations for publishing more. So pay attention to ethical correctness, but on the other hand, pay much attention to identifying the journal that suits better your contribution. You have to look at the scope of the journal. Any journal has in the website a link, a menu link to the scope. Usually it's called About. We already discussed it. And so pay attention and make sure that you fit the focus of the journal. This is extremely important. Okay, now here there is another pool. So I'm not suspending the lecture for replying to it, but please take the time now or soon after the lecture to complete it. It's on Virtuale. And again, look at the instructions. I think this is a closed answer pool. I don't remember because we prepared many of them, and therefore I don't really remember, but I think it's a closed answer. Please compile it. You find the link on Virtuale or the link on this slide. It is interesting for me in order to tune my next lecture to try to see, because besides generating the cloud word, I look also at the individual replies. So thank you very much. Okay, very good. Now, what is the limit of scientific papers? It's important to know then the potential weaknesses. It's important for reading, but it's even more important for writing. So fundamental papers, scientific papers are a fundamental tool for sharing knowledge, but they are not perfect. And of course, this is what we should expect. It's not bad faith. We are exploring new knowledge. We are going beyond the current limits of the human knowledge. Remember, we are talking about peer-reviewed papers with an international diffusion, and therefore we are really making something that is expanding our limits. So, of course, there are weaknesses in doing that. It's when, like when you attempt new explorations or you attempt climbing mountains for the first time. Now, every mountain, not everyone over the globe, but most of the mountains have been climbed. But we know what is the challenge of the unknown. And we know that when we explore the unknown, we experience weaknesses, and some of them may be also not known to us. We are unaware of these weaknesses. So the moral of the story is that when you read a paper and you write a paper, you have to pay attention to any critical issue that may be related to the paper. If you are a reader, you try to identify what could be the critical issues. When you are a writer, you have to be aware of them. And my suggestion, recognize them, make them clear. A useful thing for understanding weaknesses is try to replicate a study, or trying to make the readers, if you are the author, try to make the readers able to replicate. This is becoming an increasing requirement. So some of the journals explicitly ask you to make your findings reproducible. And by sharing the data, sharing the codes, sharing everything. And recently, there is an increasing attitude of the authors to provide those instructions, line by line instruction. Do you want to replicate my results? Okay, take this code, start with this instruction, and then this one, and then this one. This is something really demanding. First of all, because, codes sometimes are bugged, and therefore, and sometimes we are not sure of our results. And we believe they are correct, but we are concerned by replication, because it may happen that people try to replicate the study, and they find mistakes. This is something that may happen. And so it requires a lot of time, because if you want to make everything available, then you have to really make a lot of additional tests, and the code must be understandable, and therefore it's not just you. It's because typically the code is messy, and the experiment, the description of the experiment, if you want to put together a description of step by step of the experiment, it's messy. And if you want to make it understandable, it's really a challenge. So it takes time. But for sure, believe to me, in terms of your reputation, your visibility, in the long term, it is the most strategic move that you can make. Make everything reproducible. There is, unfortunately, still a gap in the mechanisms for assessing scientific productivity. And the gap is that these efforts are not immediately recognized. So if you make everything reproducible, in the long term, as I told you, it pays back, but there is no immediate recognition. So if you have to compete for a career advancement, typically, what is used to assess your productivity are numbers based on the number of publications and the number of citations, but not the number of reproducible studies. This is a gap that, in my opinion, the academic system has to fill, because there are many activities that are essential for the development of science. Think of acting as a reviewer, for instance, which are not immediately recognized. In the long term, yes, you get the recognition, because in the long term, the essence of your work comes out, not just the appearance, the first appearance. It's the long-lasting contribution that remains. And therefore, in the long term, you get recognition. But sometimes we need immediate recognition, because sometimes we have a chance to move forward in our career, and that's it. And therefore, getting the recognition when the chance is gone is not, is not what we want, okay? And I understand that indeed this is a gap of our academic system, not only academic actually, because also the industrial sector works by measuring the productivity, and sometimes there are very productive activities that are not fully taken into account. Okay, so this is the end of the story for this second lecture, and I would like to close with some final considerations. So what we did so far is to discuss how a paper should be read by first giving general principles and then going through the first, second, and third pass with some detail, okay? And this was accompanied by two asynchronous videos where we read together two papers, one starting from my detailed knowledge of it, and another one which I didn't read before. And therefore, I think that by putting together this path that we followed, this information that we gained, we should be able to have a good basis for gaining good information for reading. And then we tried to get into writing, and we outlined only general considerations so far. Okay, some specific consideration on the title and the abstract, but my plan now is to go through a detailed assessment of reading through the next lecture and through the next asynchronous, for writing, I wanted to say, through the next lecture and through the next asynchronous video. What is the target? The target is to give you all what you mean for writing papers or proposals. Before the next lecture, consider, besides filling the questionnaire, consider sending to me messages. You can use the forum, or you can also use individual emails if you prefer, about what you are expecting specifically. So some specific questions, like the ones that you asked today, are very useful. So I get prepared in advance, and we, in a way, we make a more efficient use of our time. So any suggestion, any idea that you may have is really welcome before the next lecture. And at the next lecture, I will give you detailed instructions to take the quiz, instruction and timing for taking the quiz. I think that's it, and thank you very much for attending. I see that about 20 people attended, so it's a good attendance. And once again, if you have any comment, please let me know. The video of this lecture will be made available, I think, pretty soon. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.
Thanks. Good evening.